Thank you so much, Ritvika. And thank you so much to everybody who has come here, not least the panelists, Mr. K.V. Viswanathan, Dr. Louis Tillin, who you can't yet see on screen, but she will be there soon, do not worry. Um, yeah, this is going to happen. We will see her soon, but she's there, she's already connected. I will take a few minutes just now to give you a bit of an introduction about what this book is about. And I hope that you actually get around to reading it, but this is the broad understanding. I'm sure all of you, because you are here especially, you thought something about this subject matter was important. You have a little bit of an idea about who state governors are. And maybe you have heard something of this nature in the past, that these office bearers are something like a figurehead or a nominal head, somebody who's not really a serious constitutional functionary who's doing actual governance. And if it was the case that governors were just persons who were, I don't know, hosting dinners for foreign dignitaries and giving speeches and interviews, that's all they did with their time, perhaps we would not all be sitting here. Perhaps there wouldn't be a book that we'd write about it. As it happens, the governor under our constitution is a person who has powers of the highest political order. They come up at very pointed and specific moments of time, but their potency is under no doubt. For example, just in these last couple of months, we have been seeing there have been instances where the governors of Telangana and Tamil Nadu, we have been hearing about how they are required to sign off, assent to the bill that is passed by the legislature, so as to actually bring it into force. Now, that's something that they can choose not to sign, apparently. Under certain circumstances, this is something that they have the choice to do. But that's a law that the elected representatives have actually chosen to pass. Why does this one individual who has not been voted get the choice to decide that no, we won't pass that law, we won't bring it into force? Similarly, you are certain to have heard at least one instance, if not many instances, where there have been doubts about who holds the majority in a state's legislative assembly. There have been innumerable instances in the last few years where this controversy has come up, and the governor has gotten the burden to choose as to who gets the first chance to form the government. And sometimes when the government is falling, or there is doubt about whether the government is really in power, then it's again the governor who gets the chance to decide whether that is going to get tested on the legislature, and then the person is going to be dismissed, the minister is going to be dismissed. And just in these last few days, yesterday and today, this matter has even been in the Supreme Court, where the Chief Justice has made pointed remarks about how governors have been operating. And this instance, the specific instance has been about Maharashtra, where the governor of Maharashtra not only had the question of deciding between different parties, say between the BJP and the Congress, or some such question about weighing who should get the first chance. The question even came up about how politics inside a party, that is within the Shiv Sena, two different factions, the governor claimed to have power about deciding
Recording in progress.
which of those two different factions would be getting the chance to form the government. Yes, please, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Shekhar Gupta, founder and editor-in-chief of ThePrint. You all know him by now. But thank you so much, Mr. Gupta, and glad you could join us. I was just introducing the book, and that's pretty much all I have to say about it. In the book itself, in a sense, there are three main parts of the book where we talk about the past, the present, and the future. In the past, we bring up how the office of the governor was looked at the time of British colonialism, at the time of the British Raj, and at the time of the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly debates where it was being drafted. Those of you who are familiar with constitutional law will, of course, know that what the Constituent Assembly thought, what they intended to make out of the office of the governor, is often given a lot of respect and weight. It's not all that matters, but it's given a lot of weight. And there is considerable discussion in the book about what they intended, what was the idea behind the office of the governor. There is a survey of how governors have operated throughout the history of post-independence India. And finally, there is a discussion on how we can reform it. If there are really problems with how it's functioning, how can we get it to be reformed? Now, I want to take this moment also to make a couple of remarks before we launch the book. As a somewhat slow and I guess self-involved person, I've had the great fortune of having teammates who have worked with me, and not just Ritvika and Mayuri who are here and are working with me now, but also my former teammates and my co-authors for this book, Shankar Narayanan and Kevin James, both of whom, please, if you could join me. As we are launching the book, I just wanted to say that, yeah, Shankar and Kevin, please, we'll just step down, yeah. Shankar and Kevin were with us a few years ago, but yes, they are some of the, not just the most brilliant and intelligent people, but also some of the kindest and most patient people that I've met. And it's been the case like this, even with my current teammates, that I've become accustomed to thinking that these actually go together and they are supposed to go together. So yes, at this point, this is going to be a digital book. So we're going to have a digital launch, and it's already up, all right. So, well, don't be alarmed. It is now live. Yes, there is no physical book. That's against the spirit of what we're doing here. But it is now live on the website. You can see the book by using the QR codes which are present here. You can see one. There's one by the door. Just use the QR code and you will have access to the book. You can read it anywhere you like, on your mobile phones, on your laptops, if that's how you like it. Right? And we just take a quick photograph. All right. Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for Shankar and Kevin. You would be surprised how much thought went behind what are we going to do about this? How are we going to actually launch a digital book? What's it going to look like? Can we make a video? Can we show the browser and then scroll through the pages? How is it going to look? Anyway, this is the perils of the age we live in. We have one foot in the analog world and one foot in the virtual world. Maybe in the future, when we all live in some virtual reality, this will be a much simpler question. But yes, let's please bring Dr. Tillin, Professor Tillin as well back on. Oh, those are some pages of the book. Uh, but if you could bring, please bring Professor Tillin. All right, here we are. That's not her. Yeah. All right. So I will take this opportunity to thank once again my panelists for joining me. Thank you so much for joining me and being here for this particular launch event. We actually have, I'm very happy about the combination that we have managed to bring together for this. We have a renowned journalist with the experience of decades of following the rough and tough of adversarial politics in India. We have one of the most erudite and experienced constitutional lawyers in India, and we have one of the foremost experts, not just on federalism, but Indian federalism. So right from the questions of day-to-day politics to how it plays out in the constitution to high principles of how these things are designed for governance, this is a proper spread in a spectrum of all the aspects, perhaps, that this subject entails. So with no further ado, I guess I will get started. The way we'll do this, we'll have some initial remarks about the subject, and then we'll have some free-flowing conversation before we get to the audience. So I'd like to start with you, Mr. Gupta. You've had the experience of seeing not just the ordinary experience that most people have when they look at the news and they see some headline about the governor, and their immediate reaction when they see these headlines is, oh my God, the way in which they have expressed what this governor has done. It sounds as if the governor has done something unprecedented, that this has never happened before. This governor is completely out of line. And that's just how it seems to come across to many people when they look at the news. But you have had the chance to see how politics is played out, how governors have played their role in politics over decades. And would you say that this is actually true, that many of the things that governors are doing today are unprecedented? Or would you say that many of the problems that we see, the day-to-day involvement of the governor in politics and in governance, that's often the same problems being repeated over and over again? How do you see this working out? You have a mic there. So you need to press, I think, the button a little longer on the bottom.
We got about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. I became a journalist. I think a lot of people will wince. I became a full-time employed journalist with a salary 46 years ago, right? 1977. I wasn't covering politics then. I was assigned to cover the university, medical institute, and crime in a tiny city called Chandigarh, which then had 6 lakh population. And it was the graveyard of a crime reporter because they had just about 6 murders in a year, right? So when there was a murder, you said, wow, fantastic, one more, right, right. So it was a very dead place. So we were not quite covering politics, but the first bits of politics that we saw our colleagues cover, and one of those colleagues was somebody whose daughter you now know well, Shruti Kapila, who's a professor at Cambridge. So her father was like our bureau chief, Ramesh Kapila. These were stories of the shenanigans that the governors were playing out. So 1977 was the year when Mrs. Gandhi lost power, and Janata Party came in. And the first thing they did was to dismiss all Congress governments. Uh, so who sent those reports for Article 356? It was the governors. So the governors essentially, now 77, I'm taking you back 46 years. And we know the record under Mrs. Gandhi. And even before that, even Nehru started that in Kerala. A governor had to write that report. So the institution of the governor, whatever the intentions of the founders or those who wrote the constitution or who wrote the position into the constitution, the office of the governor has always been an anti-federal institution. It's as if the republic cannot trust an elected state government fully. So there has to be somebody appointed by the center. So as far as I am concerned, constitutionally, morally, and practically from experience, this office is generally an abomination. And if it disappeared one day, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. Because if a governor only has to wait for phone calls from some joint secretary in Delhi to tell them what to do or what not to do, then the joint secretary can do it directly in some ways. So that's one. Over time, you had more and more famous, quote unquote, governors. You can count them. There was Ramesh Bhandari, Bhuta Singh, no less, and many others. The fact, however, is that you also had presidents of stature who, in some ways, were able to push back. Dr. Kalam did it, Narayanan did it, others have done it, who said, look, I will not accept it, this is not right. Even Pranab Mukherjee, in some ways, with Arunachal, he said, I will go along with this, but the governor has to go, right? So governor had to go. So I don't think the office has ever worked, whatever, if obviously intentions of whoever put it, whoever created the office were good, but it has rarely lived up to that. Because if the governor doesn't do anything political, then the governor is no job. So I will not name the person, although I think most people will guess it. But there was a particular governor in recent times who would be tweeting all the time, right? And he'd be tweeting all the time, and sometimes very controversial stuff. So there was that funeral procession of Yaqub Memon in Bombay, and I think Mumbai, because if this recording gets out, I'll be in trouble in Mumbai. And he tweeted that somebody should make a video of all these terrorists or jihadis who are parading here, and they should be. So that created quite a controversy. It just so happened that in some other context, I happened to be in his capital city. And I put out a tweet saying I'm in this city because I was meeting somebody. And I got a call saying, why did you come home for dinner? So I did go home for dinner. And after we finished our dinner, governors also have good sumptuary allowance. They get access to duty-free single malt liquor as well. These are benefits of the office. So in that sort of mood of good spirit, uh, I asked the governor, I asked His Excellency that, you hold a constitutional office. Should you be tweeting all the time? And should you be chattering on Twitter with Pakistanis, women in this case, good people, right? Good people, Pakistani liberals, maybe you can say. I said, should a governor be doing it? So he said, but before that, you tell me what I tweeted earlier uh, on Yaqub Memon and what I've been tweeting generally. Am I doing something wrong? I said, no, first you tell me, how can you, as governor, be chattering with Pakistanis on Twitter? So he said to me, he held my arm and he said to me, what do I do? I have nothing to do all day. My fingers itch, right? So if, because what could he do? The state was being run by his party, right? So he had nothing to do in the state. So if a governor is playing the governor's role, then he or she is only cutting ribbons and tweeting to Pakistanis, tweeting to everybody, including probably Pakistani liberals. They will not tweet to Indian liberals, right? Uh, so, but any governor who is in an opposition capital will always play games. If you look at the Congress rule, UPA 2, by the time UPA 2 came in, just list the governors they had. That is the greatest ever elevation of the Indian police service. I think at one point, 6 or 7 of their governors were from IPS. It's never happened in India's history before or after. Why were they there? They were there, one because they were people who had run intelligence agencies. Several, I think 3 of them were former DIBs, right? So they knew how to do this stuff. And second, this was also reward for services rendered in the past. It's just that with passage of time, everybody discovers new technologies and everybody discovers better uses for older technologies, like computers. There was 286, then there was something else, then there was Pentium, then there was something else, etc., etc. So just the scale keeps changing. And the methods keep changing. For example, now 356 is not so easy to use. It's almost impossible to use. But just make a count. In fact, we were working on this story today. Make a count on legislations passed by assemblies in non-BJP run states, which are waiting for governor's assent. And that idea came up because Telangana government has gone to Supreme Court saying that 10 of our bills passed by our assembly are sitting for governor's assent. So, I mean, office is there. Nobody will take this office away. But the fact is that the institution is essentially an anti-federal institution.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta. And it's interesting that you've given this swathe of ideas about how we think about how we have seen what governors have been doing. And I was able to gauge from you that we are, and that this is a common view, that do we really need this institution? Can we do away with it? And especially these instances where they are very vocal and they are speaking to people and saying things which don't seem very dignified. How are we supposed to view these issues? And we really flesh this out as we go forward with the discussion. But to Mr. Viswanathan, let's move now to the question of how this has been envisaged in the Constitution, in its text, and how it's played out. Could you give us a little idea about the constitutional terrain and landscape, to give a little bit of a gist about one particular provision to the audience? The Constitution actually says, in a very strange way, that the governor has all the executive power, all the executive authority of the state. And in exercising that executive authority, he's supposed to do it on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. This is what the Constitution says. But it's actually very confusing, because actually the Constitution requires that aid and advice be binding. We don't think of the words aid and advice as binding, but this is something related to how these conventions were taken from the British times. And now we understand that governors are normally bound, but they have some areas of some room for moving around. Could you give us a little idea about how this works, Mr. Viswanathan?
Thank you, Lalit. At the outset, let me congratulate Vidhi and Shankar, Kevin, and you for the outstanding book. I had the benefit of reading it because I requested you and you sent me. Now, the problem is actually not with the office of the governor. It is with the incumbents some of them who have come to man the office. Because if you see the Constitution as it stands today, it is not an office which can be dispensed with. I may slightly disagree with Shekhar ji on that. For example, formation of government after the elections are over, the hustings are over, and then, there is a multi-party, there is a number, there could be a fractured mandate. Now, somebody will have to have this role of calling the majority party. That's what the intention of the Constitution is. There's an article which says there shall be a governor. He shall function on the aid and advice. But for the governor, there are certain narrow areas where he functions on discretion, which is without the aid and advice. You can't tabulate it exhaustively, but an attempt was made in Samsher Singh, and as you have rightly captured it, Navam Rabia has actually, crystallized it further. So the call to be made as to who should be invited to form the government. At that point, there's no aid and advice. There's no government yet in position. The previous government has been voted out of power. The new government is about to take charge. So you need the office of the governor. So that's one area where he exercises discretion. Secondly, if there is a constitutional breakdown, assent is one part where the governor's role is really, except for reserving it to the president, where it could overlap with an area where the parliament alone could legislate, because that's a call again he will have to take. It can't be left to courts in judicial review. Emergency powers of dismissal. In the Bommai case, while 2 instances they found that there was gross abuse of power by the governor in formulating the report, and the report alone need not be the basis also. But in 3 other states, they found that the report was valid. So he is perceived as a representative of the center because we are a quasi-federal setup. We are still not a federal setup like the United States. We are a quasi-federal setup. And one of the intention was, perhaps it was relevant in the 50s, that fissiparous tendencies could emerge in the state. So there could be claims for secession. So we need somebody who would give a, be a representative. Idea was it will be an eminent person who would give sage counsel. That was the intention. But the problem is, like in most public offices in our country, the incumbents have, breached the clarion call that both Babu Rajendra Prasad and Dr. Ambedkar made in the Constituent Assembly. It's not the Constitution that matters, but ultimately the people who man them. It's an oft-quoted passage. So here is a structure where he has this role of calling it at the outset when the elections are held. Midway when there is, defections, genuine large-scale defections. Not when the governor is entering the political thicket. I don't want to comment on the case which is going on, where he, enters the political thicket and misuses his power. An umpire of democracy turning to be a saboteur. That is the problem. I remember a meeting where Justice Krishnaya presided. I've been trying to see whether it was written somewhere. He said, we must have all checks to see that he doesn't turn out to be a constitutional cobra, he said. That's the phrase that Krishnaya employed. I'm not able to locate the written word. I remember him speaking at the Constitutional Hall. So, assent of bills. The 4 areas which will really require, certain discussion, which you have thoroughly thrashed out in the book, and the formation part, where, you genuinely go for the majority party, or a pre-poll combination, or a combination post-poll when there is no pre-poll combination. For every Ramesh Bhandari, you have had a Barnala who refused to recommend in spite of the dictates from the center. You mentioned it in your book. So, secondly, on the midway change of governments. Thirdly, on assent of bills. It's a huge issue. There's no time limit prescribed. They're trying to defeat the, democratic process. The legislature has passed the bill. So, Now it's time for the court to step in and lay down guidelines. Every time the court has intervened, it was Bommai for emergency powers, Rameshwar Prasad again for emergency powers, and before that, BP Singhal. When the UPA government in July removed governors of 4 states, the challenge was made in 2004, but it came up for hearing in 2010. It was, confined to laying down guidelines. And 156.3 was so construed that you don't remove for arbitrary reasons. Pleasure doesn't mean arbitrary exercise of power. You don't remove because his ideology is not in sync with your ideology. Very often it happens when the ruling party in the center is different from the ruling party in the state. And a time limit to be read in. There is a fundamental principle of law that where there is no time limit, you read a reasonable time in it. It's just constitutional duty. There are other functions. The disqualification of an MLA who is already elected is by the Election Commission, governor on the advice of the Election Commission. The Election Commission is binding. There was a case, I was part of it, but we ultimately succeeded. But there was a case that the governor was not forwarding the papers to the Election Commission. That was the issue was that he was trying to protect the incumbent. So it had to be moved. So every time the court had intervened, there have been guidelines and there has been, some restriction, some, a prevention of abuse of power. So I would think that what is really required is not abolish the office, but lay down certain parameters. And one of the reasons which occurred to me, but I found that you already mentioned in the book is, let Sunlight in. Get him to record reasons every step down the line. Make it somehow mandatory to put it on the website, the RTI power, so that he is subjected to public opprobrium. And the press, they are not, fortunately we have, maybe some part is compromised, but we have an independent press. And if they take it up and expose the governor, I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of opaqueness around his functioning. If it is brought out and he has this fear that he would be named and shamed, they would come around. They would be genuine umpires of democracy. I think that's the way to go about this office. I won't even call it a necessary evil. It is a necessary office. It is an important office. But we need incumbents who man it, who are of moral fiber, who have genuine democratic concern in mind. And it's not that we have not had it. We have had exceptional people. I think the way forward is that.
Thank you so much. This is lovely. It's nice to see these two perspectives. These two perspectives coming from the two places that they come from, where we see the way in which governors act day to day, and then we look at how they act at specific moments when they are called upon by the Constitution, supposedly, to do certain things according to the principles of the Constitution. And it's not been clear, because there are many voices that say abolish it, there are many voices that say constrain it with rules, and I think it's now a good time that we zoom out a little. Yeah, sure. Please.
Mr. Barnala, Mr. Barnala, I'd just like to underline the fact that Mr. Barnala, being an Akali Dal leader, had an ideological position on the office of the governor and on the powers of the state. He was an Akali Dal leader and he was committed to the Anandpur Sahib resolution of 1974, which said that center should only have powers over currency, foreign affairs, and I think mainly currency, foreign affairs, and defense. So that was Article 370 plus. So he was committed to that. All these people had stood at the Gurdwara in 1974 and sworn by that resolution. So for an Akali Dal leader to play a non-interfering governor was being true to his ideology, even more than being true to the Constitution. I just have to muddle everything with politics.
No, but that's absolutely correct. And this really brings out how this variety of views, there's not been any one view about how governors should be carrying out their duties, nor has there been any just one fixed view about how federalism is supposed to be implemented in our country. And this is actually a good point at which to zoom out a little bit from how the constitution, the courts, and politics have been playing out to think a little bit about the question of design, because it's easy to miss the fact that many of the ways in which our constitution and our politics has been working has not been through the choices of individuals made day to day. It's been because of the way the game has been constrained already. The constitution itself has put in place, through its design, things that are already determining many choices made by actors at this present moment. So, Professor Tillin, you've had the opportunity to study, and you had a deep insight of various ways in which federalism is implemented in different countries, how the principle of federalism actually is supposed to function, and I think you would be best placed to give us a little understanding about how it was implemented in India. What was the idea? What was federalism supposed to do in India? What was unique about it when it was thought of as something that we need in India? And what is it supposed to do for individuals, day-to-day Indians? How was it unique? What was new about it?
Thank you, Lalit, and thank you to all of you for having me here and bearing with the fact I am appearing remotely. I really wish I was there in the room with you. First of all, thank you, and many congratulations for the launch of this really important book. I think truly the first systematic study of the governors, which I really welcome. I think I'd like to start just by noting that the design of the office of the governor is fascinating from a federal point of view, because it embodies what I think is a really still unresolved contradiction in the design of Indian federalism between the centralizing tendencies that are there enshrined in the constitutional text and the recognition of state autonomy, which is there too in the constitutional text, but has also been enhanced through the practice of politics since the constitution was promulgated. So I see that as the central tension in India's constitutional design. And I think, as the previous speakers have said, the failure to adequately define the scope of the governor's discretionary powers really meant that the constitution left the operation of federalism exposed in very important ways to the ways in which the inhabitants of the governor's office have interpreted their role, and indeed the ways in which those incumbents have also interpreted the nature of Indian federalism. So I really think this is an important inquiry, and I'm very glad to be part of the conversation today. You asked me about the design of Indian federalism, how it departed from other models, what makes it distinctive, what its purposes are. And I think I might start by slightly distinguishing my understanding of Indian federalism from that Mr. Viswanathan has just offered, which is the idea that India is a quasi-federal model. I think that in very important ways, Indian federalism needs to be seen as a model in its own right, not as a diminished version of something else. This is not American federalism light. This is Indian federalism designed for India and by India in a particular constitutional moment. So I think that's the first thing to say, that I really see Indian federalism as distinctive in important ways, but not as somehow a diminished form of federalism. And I think there are probably three key dimensions which show us how it's distinctive. The first, and this is why federalism is often described as quasi-federal, thanks to Casey Weir in the 1960s, this is the idea of the strong centre in Indian federalism, with very clearly defined prerogatives for the central government to intervene in the rights of states. So that's the first. Very often this element of Indian federalism has been understood in the context of partition and as an attempt to protect against what otherwise might be the vociferous tendencies of future, secessionist attempts. There are other reasons too, though, why the founding fathers opted for a centralized model of federalism. In brief, those are also related to the kind of national economy that the Constituent Assembly was trying to build, ensuring that a central authority had the ability to regulate economic competition and bring a national economy together, but also connected with the kind of democratic project that the Constituent Assembly was also embracing with the extension of universal franchise. So for many reasons, Indian federalism was designed with a strong centre. The second distinctive element, I think, is the strong degree of interdependence that it entails between the central government and state governments. And this was also quite unique in the 20th century. So both the existence of a substantial concurrent list, but also the administrative dependencies of the centre on state governments. All of these mean that there is a really strong degree of interdependence shot through in the constitution. And the third key thing that makes Indian federalism distinctive is the degree of flexibility that it enables. And that is partly by virtue of the fact that India is a parliamentary federal system, obviously, which means that a party with dominance in parliament is able to amend the constitution, interpret with some degree of flexibility some of the provisions of the constitution. And I outline all of those in some detail because I think the office of the governor is really critical in all three of those dimensions, both in the way that the centre interacts with the states and what it means to have a centre-heavy form of federalism, also in the way in which the central government interacts with states on a day-to-day basis. So the functioning of intergovernmental relations, in very important measure, work through the office of the governor, especially in the absence of other strong institutionalized mechanisms of intergovernmental cooperation. And lastly, the governor's office is absolutely emblematic of the flexibility inherent in the Constitution. And I think it's really striking, actually, that no major study of federalism has really centrally studied the role of the governor. Of course, it's been a question in the various commissions, the Sarkaria Commission, Munshi Commission on centre-state relations. But I really welcome this book because I think it encourages us to see the governor's office as absolutely central to the operation of federalism. The last point I wanted to make is really resonates with what the previous speaker also said, which is that federalism works not only because of the design of institutions, but how they are interpreted and practiced in day-to-day political life. And I think here it is really important to think or to ask whether there is something like a federal principle or a federal spirit at large in India. And if I were to kind of think about classic understandings of federalism as an idea which hinges on partnership, guaranteed by covenant, grounded in faith and trust, or the idea of federalism itself as a moral enterprise, which requires two levels of governments to act with self-restraint, to seek to avoid causing damage to either level, to see the moral imperative for smooth relations between levels of government, and seek to foster trust and understanding and a fostering of the observation of unwritten constitutional norms. If we think that something like a federal spirit or federal principle is really crucial to the practice and grounding of federalism, then it's the office of the governor, which on a day-to-day basis needs to uphold and give voice to those often unwritten elements of India's constitutional order.
Thank you so much, Professor Tillin. This actually, once again, rounds out the discussion even further because we do see that there is a possibility of something different from what we currently see that the Office of the Governor is doing. And it's possible to see that if we see it from the light of what it was supposed to do in the beginning. Is that possible? Can that be done? So, Mr. Gupta, I'll come back to you. You've heard the views of Mr. Viswanathan and Professor Tillin. How do you see some of the things that they mentioned playing out against how we see governors today? For example, we might think that they are often errant and they're often committing, they're doing different kinds of ill conduct, which is against what we're supposed to have state governments for, governments of smaller units that actually manage to bring government closer to people. All of these things, the governor is in the way. But there is what Professor Tillin also mentioned, that this initial idea was there, that the governor is supposed to act like a bridge. The center's interest in the state has to be given voice in some manner. So how do you see this playing out against the way in which we often see popular representation of the governor? And also, I could ask you at the same time about what Mr. Viswanathan was mentioning, that do you think that for every errant governor, there has also been a governor who has risen to the occasion, who has actually shown the mettle to stand up for the Constitution, to do the right thing? I mean, do you see that there have been some such instances in the past?
Well, the fact is that governors who do their job well never make any news, because there is no job to do except do ceremonials and read out, and if they give any counsel to the chief minister, it's supposed to be done quietly. So governors who do their jobs as envisaged in the constitution never make any news. They fade away, and they are sent there to fade away. A few might have made headlines on the good side, but they are very few. And I can also tell you, unfortunately, if you quote me any example, I will tell you the politics behind it. So if General S.K. Sinha took a certain view in Assam, there was politics behind it. General S.K. Sinha was superseded by Mrs. Gandhi. He was the senior most. He should have become the army chief. She did not make him the army chief. She made General Vaidya the army chief. The excuse she used was that General Vaidya had combat experience. He had Mahavir Chakras in 2 wars. Superseded him. He was already seen in that establishment to be closer to JP, etc. So he went on that side, then he was patronized by that side. So not every governor, most governors are not apolitical beings. Most governors have come out of politics, or they've been rewarded with the job as a consequence of some politics, some political event. So it's very complicated. But as I said earlier, if a governor just does their job, it's a very boring job. Because if you just give counsel to the chief minister, maybe it's the wisest counsel, but if it doesn't get into the papers, then what's the point, right? What do you tell your great-grandchildren? There's no evidence. So I think the intentions of whoever did it, I mean, these were very wise people, intentions were great, but in the kind of politics we've had, and you can't say this started in 2014. History of India did not start in 2014, right? Nor did, just as the history of the world did not start with Google, right? Although a lot of people believe that. अच्छा पहले भी हुआ था, बॉस गूगल के पहले भी हुआ था, yes. Similarly, history of India or politics of India did not start in 2014. It's been going on. It's just that now there is a lot more media. There is social media. There are TV channels. And the courts are always there, but a lot more is going to the courts. So I'd say it's more of the same. Now, I can play the old man and I can say, oh, in our times, things were not so bad. They were bad, but they were not so bad, right? But you know, when you start accepting bad things, then worse things happen. Because, you know, Victor Hugo said, nobody can stop a bad idea, nobody can stop an idea whose time has come, which I have modified as nobody can stop a bad idea whose time has come. And once the time of a bad idea comes, the second law is that somebody will come and make it worse. So that's precisely what's happened. Look at so many cops becoming governors. Look at so many politicians who are made governors just because you want to get them out of the way of somebody else. So Mr. Koshyari was made governor of Maharashtra because you had to make somebody else the chief minister in Uttarakhand. Okay, I'll make you governor. A lot of governorships are given away like that. So once that becomes the practice, why was Mr. Barnala the governor of Tamil Nadu, since the names come up? That's because there was a phase when everybody in Sikh politics who supported the idea of making peace, uh, was under assassination threat. Sant Longowal, who signed his peace accord with Rajiv Gandhi in 1985, he was assassinated within 3 months, 4 months, thereabouts, of signing that accord. Sardar Balwant Singh, the finance minister of Punjab, who acted behind the scenes to make that settlement between Rajiv government and the Akali Dal possible, he was assassinated. Mr. Barnala was another of these so-called peacemakers, and he was a marked man. So he had to be taken to either Puducherry or to the Andamans or to a Raj Bhavan someplace. That's how Mr. Ribeiro, who was Punjab DGP, he was sent to Romania, Bucharest as ambassador, because it's an East European country, security is very good. Nobody had imagined that East Europe will unravel and two assassins will get into Bucharest and shoot him and his wife. They survived, but they took a lot of bullets. So a lot of these appointments were made like that. But when Mr. Barnala goes to Tamil Nadu, whoever did this got their politics wrong. I think it must have been VP Singh's government, because they got him to Tamil Nadu also at that point, because he was coming in the way of Mr. Badal and others. They were allies of the VP Singh government. So he had to be rewarded. But they made the mistake of sending him to Tamil Nadu, forgetting that since the 60s, there had been a very strong alliance between the DMK, right from the times of Annadurai and the Akali Dal, on exactly this question, on the question of federalism, on the question of states having more power. So you can analyze every single case like that. So you can say, oh, so-and-so did this, so-and-so on the other hand. I don't think, even if you did a count, a cricket score sheet, I think it'll be quite a poor score sheet. It'll be a bit like India all out at Adelaide at 36 all out on one side, and somebody getting 505 for 5 declared on the other.
Right. That's a pretty clear view on that. Mr. Viswanathan, I'll give you the chance to either, if you have some examples, or if you'd like to mention about how you see this possibility of the good governor, this image of a governor who's actually doing the right job. And I'd like you to put that against also the solution that you suggested. You've suggested that there have been these interventions by courts. The most prominent ones that we hear about at the time of Bomai, about president's rule, state emergencies, however you call it, and over the course of time, with the development of this idea of a floor test to decide these tricky questions, and the exact questions where we think governors are necessary, that they need to do something about these hung assemblies, or in places where majorities are unclear. Those are the places where people think that this sort of institution makes a little sense. There's been interventions on that, and now we have this intervention through Nawam Rabia, this current judgment that might be coming out soon. It's been reserved by the Chief Justice's bench on Maharashtra. All of these things, have you felt that they have been effective in solving the issue? Have they've made progress in some, but have they gone all the way? And especially on the question of BP Singhal, the judgment which tried to create a solution about the appointment question. Perhaps you could give us a little about that as well. The removal of governors. Sorry.
See, the interventions have definitely improved the situation from before, at least in theory. But on the practical side of it, it is again dependent on the people who operate it. You mentioned appointment before we go to Singhal. There's another problem of transfer, which you have addressed. You want to get rid of a governor, you can always transfer it. Appointment, you have suggested a mechanism very similar to what the mechanism which the Supreme Court has now said in Election Commission. But I think governor being purely an executive appointee, I think the best way to streamline would be to make the consultation mandatory and meaningful. with the Chief Minister of the state and make it transparent. Equally so for transfer. But I don't think beyond that, on the governor's office, there could be any, restriction or a committee, because it's purely, even the role of disqualification is on the opinion of the election commission. It's binding on him. He has no role on that. So there's no quasi-judicial functions or, large-scale democratic functions like the election commission does, which the Supreme Court saw. There are people who have opposite views on it. Now, coming to removal, you see, the Supreme Court only went thus far. That is, pleasure doesn't mean you can act arbitrarily, whimsically, remove him, with no reasons whatsoever, or because he's not in sync with you, the very words used in the judgment. And they also said that if the governor who's removed comes to court and makes out a case of prima facie of an arbitrary removal, we could call upon the union to show the material on the basis, and a relief could follow. They also said that because two views would be possible, we wouldn't want to interfere. So that is where it operates now. But I don't think that, any further restriction on this would be advisable, because it's a purely executive role. It is all in the implementation part of it. I know your book addresses a serious concern that it is all well said in theory, but it is not, But who is to bring this? Every political party is happy with the way things are. Who will bring these amendments? Then the courts will have to intervene. And when they intervene, they work around the existing provision, the precedent, and lay down that you won't enter the political thicket while calling a party to form the government. You will uphold democracy. You will not be removed for arbitrary reasons. We will seriously peruse your report when you say that a government constitutionally elected will be dismissed, and then, subject it to rigorous judicial review. That's all it can be done. So ultimately, it will depend on the individual. Now, on the individuals, you see, even the Sarkaria Commission, again, you adverted to it, and the other commissions which went into it, wanted people who are eminent, not too much involved in politics at the point of appointment, they say. Constituent Assembly said that. Sarkaria Commission wanted a cooling off period even for politicians, so that, he is not involved in the politics of the day. And so that was the idea. I think, you see, the institution does serve a purpose. It can be an important tool to uphold democracy. But as I said earlier, it is in the way, it has been operated. You can't use them as hatchet men. Because the previous government has done it, you can't cite that precedent and say it is okay now, you see. At some stage, you have to draw a line and say, now, we will not follow wrong precedents. We have all the wherewithal now, the majority, no proper opposition inside. We will now be precedent setting. We will set precedents. We'll appoint men of real eminence. We'll uphold democracy. Who will invite the party in power, irrespective of whether it is opposed to your ideology. The people it's a people's mandate, you see. You can't think of it that. It's your vote, my vote. It's just, wished away. Because few people have gone this side, or you perceive they have gone this side. See, that's an individual call, and that can only come with, you can't, put it in cut and dried language. So that's the real problem.
It seems we've definitely come to this question about how to resolve the issue. We are pretty clear that there is an issue involved, that governors have been acting out, and there needs to be a solution for it, and everybody has been suggesting them. It might be a good point to actually give you a snapshot of what the book suggests. It's a big spoiler alert. We neither suggest that it should be abolished, nor do we suggest that there should be rules constraining what the governor does. And there's a little bit of an idea behind it. I'd just like to mention it. First, abolition. When we consider the idea of abolishing the governor's office, the question comes up about who is supposed to do those functions that the governor is normally supposed to do. And the classic example that is often used is who's supposed to decide about that majority. When it is unclear who has that majority, who's supposed to decide it? Can we give it to the election commission or to some judges, or is it supposed to be a constitutional matter? Who's supposed to decide if it is unclear? Should there be a time limit within which a floor test has to take place, and it's an automatic time limit? For this set of problems, what we felt, the three of us in the book, what we put out at least, is that giving it to somebody else, both of the big options that we have, the chief minister, who would be the executive of the state, giving these, I mean, not the majority question, but other questions, handing it over to the chief minister is a problem, because already we have a country in which the legislature is not very much checking the executive. The executive is already very strong, so giving more powers to the executive won't work. And we can't give it to judges, because that would politicize the judiciary. These questions cannot be answered by judges, often also because there are no rules, there are no legal rules that can answer them. Is a post-poll alliance definitely and always worse than a pre-poll alliance? Is there a principled way, a legal reason why we can say that one is worse, has to be disqualified forever? These are some of the problems that come up. This is why we think that there should be something like an impartial institution that decides these questions. Then on the question of limiting it with rules, what we have somewhat tried to flesh out is that we already have an extremely long constitution, and it's actually indicative of how we are a very low trust society. We are not able to trust these individuals. Professor Tillin will be able to tell you that governors in other countries, they work on what's called conventions. There's not even any rule that is telling them that you have to do this. There are precedents that are set according to how they have operated in the past. And if these conventions, if we want to try to bring them out in India, we need to leave space for it to grow. So for this, we have simply suggested that there should be a power sharing body, a body with multiple members from the state and the center, opposition and ruling, who decide along with the High Court Chief Justice, who is to be appointed. And for removal, we think a process of impeachment should take place. Now, naturally, that need not be the solution necessarily, but I wanted to turn to Professor Tillin. How do you see this sort of a solution? Let's say idealistically that it works out. How do you see this sort of a solution playing out? You've already worked on your book as well. You've mentioned about how the Rajya Sabha, as an institution that is supposed to act as a federal check, how that has been functioning. You've also got a fair idea about how power sharing and cooperation between center and state, how that's been functioning in India generally. How do you see this functioning in this area, in this particular subject matter? How do you see it playing out?
Thanks. Well, yes, let's set aside the question of whether this is likely to whether these reforms are likely to come to pass. I agree with the previous speaker that the window of political opportunity here might be somewhat narrow, given that most parties, I think, are kind of bought in at some level to the national parties, at least, to the way that the office of the governor has been designed. But I think the question you're asking is really about who speaks for the states in questions related to the governor, given that you're asking about the Rajya Sabha. And I think in the book you recommend a process of impeachment in which the Rajya Sabha would be involved, which I think is an interesting idea. But I think I would qualify that with some reflection on the limitations of the Rajya Sabha as a federal chamber. Of course, you know, in terms of the representation in the Rajya Sabha, it mirrors the Lok Sabha. So this is not a chamber in which states' rights are naturally defended and articulated as they might be in the classic federal system, so to speak. You know, the US being the kind of original case where states are represented on an equal basis of the Senate, and therefore you're likely to see a much stronger defense of states' interests in the upper house. But I do wonder whether this is a moment in which the time is also right for a wider discussion of the Rajya Sabha. And I say that partly with the impending unrolling of the delimitation commission to come in the next couple of years, as we're going to see the the representation of states in both houses of parliament change, assuming that they representation is updated along the lines of the most recent census data, and that will obviously widen or kind of deepen the anxiety that some states feel about the way that they're represented in the centre. So, particularly the case for the southern states that may see their representation in both houses of parliament reduced. So this seems a moment to think more broadly about the role of the Rajya Sabha in providing some element of federal balance, which might have to take on board principles of representation in the upper house, as well as the potential role for the Rajya Sabha in regulating the performance of the office of the governor. I think those are conversations to be welcomed, but how they are made possible is another question, I think, politically.
All right. So I think at this point, I just ask one final question, and I'll open it to both of you to put it out. In a sense, when this subject has already come up, but in a sense, when we talk about constitutional law and constitutional reform, it's markedly different from ordinary politics. Like in a cricket game, when you're playing the game itself, you can bowl someone out, you can catch someone out, you can hit a six, and it hits the boundary. But at no point during the game do you play it by saying that, hey, let's shift the boundary, let's change where the boundary sits. Or like in gully cricket, should we start making one top out? Is that something that we'll start allowing? Let's change the rules itself. Constitutional law is supposed to play this sort of a role. So I wanted to ask both of you, because both of you had a strong engagement with seeing law, perhaps more on Mr. Viswanathan's side, and seeing politics on Mr. Gupta's side. How do you see this playing out in India? The question of constitutional politics. Do our politicians really rise to the occasion and treat questions of constitutional politics as different from question of day-to-day politics, partisan politics, or party politics, as one would say? Do they differentiate between them? Are they able to? Mr. Viswanathan?
See, I think it will depend on the individual as to who would want to be known as a statesman, who would want to just pass on only as a politician. So that is a purely individual thing. Coming back to your question about writing it down in the Constitution, and this was the situation under the Government of India Act. You also refer to the Instrument of Instructions, which was appended, which was debated. Initially, there was a view that we'll also have an Instrument of Instruction, but that was given up, and they said, let the conventions grow. See, these were some assumptions the constitution makers made. Some of them gone awfully wrong, but the intention was bona fide. They said, let it evolve from situation to situation, and then, let a convention build around the areas where discretion has to be prescribed. The other aspect is of constitutional morality, or what you call it, political morality. That is again a purely internal personal factor. Ultimately, how would a majority of well-meaning citizens view a particular action? That is why I said the best way to handle it is to subject them to rigorous recording of reasons and publishing them, and to let the press, a very responsible press, people like Shekharji, take it up and write about it, so that when he or she knows that they are under public gaze, I think they will themselves modulate their actions to be in tune with what the Constitution would want. Otherwise, it will all be in theory.
All right. Mr. Gupta, on the same question.
Well, I think it will be too much to expect that such a human being will descend, who will then say that all the precedents that took place before me don't matter, life begins afresh. now for, in fact, misusing offices like these or opportunities like these, everybody has even more precedents. Because, say, the Prime Minister in his speech on the last session, he said, pointing to Rahul, that your grandmother dismissed so many governments, I think 50 something, using Article 356. So in politics, just as in law works on precedents. You quote this judgment, that judgment, this judgment, that judgment. Politics also works on precedent. So, I mean, you should be careful when you do these things, that someday someone else will come to power and will use the same maybe against you. But most people, when they're in power, don't imagine that they will someday be out of power. And I'll give you an example. Look at some of the laws that the UPA made. Look at the amendments UPA made in UAPA. UPA had to repeal POTA for the simple reason that to set up UPA 1, a common minimum program, some of the parties who were coming along, they also brought along Muslim concerns that POTA was being used to target them, right? So you said, we will repeal POTA. So POTA was repealed. Now POTA was repealed. At the same time, you amended UAPA in such a way and put so much toxic stuff in it that I'm sure many of the victims of POTA feel nostalgic about that one now, right? So so you do these things. Similarly, whoever made NDPS at whatever time never imagined that these are such powers, denial of bail, for example, mandatory denial of bail, again with PMLA, that these could be used by somebody else, because all this was done with the presumption that we will never go out of power. So power, sir, is like that. Once you have it, you think it will never leave you. Once it leaves you, what you do, you sit in the doghouse, but you're spending all your time sharpening the knives for when you come back and will use the same thing. So it's very difficult. I think it ultimately is a question of institutions, individuals. Individuals can make institutions. If for one or see how TN Session created, just reinvented election commission. We never thought the commission had such power. He created a new aura of power at the commission, which 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 several generations of successors have failed to dismantle, despite efforts by many. Right? Uh, see what Justice Verma did to Supreme Court. So that is the I in the institution. One individual can make an institution. So you need one or two governors who stand up like this, one or two presidents. Why do we remember President Kalam, President Narayanan? Because they stood up to some of this and they said, look, governor may send this, central government may send this, but this is not correct. See the moral stature of Dr. Kalam and how he enhanced the stature of the president's office when he pushed back at the collegium on some Supreme Court appointments and some CJ appointments in high courts. And he kept on sending those back until his point was made. And I can tell you this because I was on the other side of this story, because I was the editor of the paper that was in a way benefiting from these stories. Also once had to pay for it. That his notes to the collegium and to the government objecting to this judge's appointment were being published in my paper, right? And you have to pay for it. So that is the time the same judge was sealing some buildings in the area where our office was located. And we had nothing to do with this. So one day he sealed 6 buildings and he sealed a 7th one. That's where our offices were located. So it was a very clever one because he had sealed us. Now we could go to his court and take 6 months proving that we had done nothing wrong, but we had to run our paper, bring out the paper the next day. If we had gone to court, if we had still run this story on the latest objections by President Kalam, it would be contempt of court because he had sealed us and we were running a story against him. We got sealed on the day that the reporter from the Express, Ritu Sareen, called him for his version, saying that the president has these objections to your promotion, what do you have to say? So he just told his committee, in saalon ko bhi band kar do, right? So humko bhi band kar diya. So that is the story ultimately that we passed on to the Hindu. Because we said this story must see the light of day. So I called Ram and I said, look, I have this story, I can't publish it. I've gone to every lawyer, every great lawyer in this city, and they are all saying you can't do it except one. But that one was Ram Jethmalani, right? so, so, so I said to him, and I said, do you remember what happened when Washington Post got injuncted over Pentagon Papers? He said, yes, they gave that to the New York Times. So I said, I have a story like that. Can I give it to you? So we agreed to meet. He was coming to Delhi, and I can tell you the date. That was Yamini Iyer's wedding. So we met at Yamini Iyer's wedding, and like an old spy operation, I took out the printout of the story and gave to him. But all of this happened because Dr. Kalam stood up, in this case, to the collegium, right? And that judge, as a result, could never make to the Supreme Court. And you know who I'm talking about, right? So, because in your community, everybody was happy that he did not make it to that. So I'm saying that if an individual wants to make something of a position, they can make everything of that position. In this case, this stuff also got published in a newspaper somebody could trust. So, so institutional positions enable you to do things. But as Justice Verma said, that you can do it. One man can make an institution, or one woman, but there have to be two requirements. One, you should not have a past, and second, you should not have an expectation in the future.
Thank you so much. This is great that we are not only are we seeing the importance of idealism and high principle, and also the importance of an individual, but we have these anecdotes as well about how power makes one forget, and yet going out of power brings all the grudges out of the shadows, and you suddenly regain your memories. Oh, that these things can happen, and they have happened to me. We are running pretty much out of time, but we are now up for questions from the audience. Yeah, we will take perhaps 3 questions to start, and we'll see where it goes. And the mics are, yes, please. Yeah. And please also let us know who you're directing the question to.
I'm a civil servant, and Mr. Shekhar Gupta talked about the role of individuals. Of course, it's very important. But Mr. Viswanathan, I would like to know that what about the office of the Lieutenant Governor? We have talked about the government and now you talked about that consultation should be compulsory. Now, under the transaction of business rules, it is compulsory that the Lieutenant Governor must consult the minister if there are differences over a period of 10 days. Thereafter, move to the Council of Ministers, and the timeline is 50 days after the transaction of business rules. Thereafter, if there are differences, then you move to the President of India. Now, this is not happening. Now, you have the rules, the transaction of business rules being violated. So, even if you have a kind of a consultation mechanism, that is also not working. So, can you think of kind of having guidelines evolved by the Supreme Court of India, thinking about various scenarios and having a code of conduct? We are Justice J.S. Verma, we are the Shekhar Gupta, having a code of conduct which could be evolved, thinking about various scenarios, under this condition, what should be done, what, of course that will not be 100% complete, but still it will be kind of something indicative. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mahesh, your very question is addressed in the government of NCT case. You remember 2017. They have laid down that you have to have a spirit of cooperation and not confrontation. And it's not any question that you will refer. Ordinarily, you will abide by, even in Delhi under 239 AA, the aid and advice. Already the guidelines are there, but the problem is not with the guidelines. You are exactly making the point I've made. If the incumbent concerned, if he's not followed it, he's not going to follow any future guidelines that you're going to make. So how do we address this? It is not about the written word. It's about translating in action and functioning for a common purpose under the Constitution, which is an utopian ideal is what Shekhar Gupta, with all his experience, says. But at some stage, that's the appeal, that you cry a full stop to all this. Don't cite precedents which are obnoxious. You set precedents. See, that will give an everlasting impact. The ground reality is available. All that is required is to implement it. Write it down. Today I studied that judgment also because I knew that the Lieutenant Governor is an allied issue, though the dynamics are a little different because it's a union territory with a legislature. So 239 AA operates and it is governed by that provision, not the 155, 163, 200, which we have for the states. So this is how ultimately you keep laying down one guideline after the other. It has to be followed not only in letter, but also in spirit. The problem is on the spirit.
Guidelines, sir. It just stated the rules which are contained in the transaction of business. The judgment said there is a need for constitutional statements.
See, they wanted play in the joints to be given. Everything can't be written down, and you can't anticipate everything. You see, that's why you lay down the broad principle and say that if this is a scheme which the government has said you need to clear, and you know that it is a thing which has to be cleared, you don't delay it. You assent to bills on time. Unless it is patently unconstitutional. The book has an instance of Kerala where there was an ordinance which was reversing a Supreme Court judgment. And the governor was faced with a situation when the bill was sent as to what is to be done with it. Patently unconstitutional because it didn't remove the basis of the judgment, which is permissible. It reversed the judgment. So he was caught in that bind and he wouldn't sign it. So those are different exceptional scenarios where the constitution is on the side of the governor. But when the constitution is on the side of the government, which I mean the Council of Ministers, the governor is acting as a clog. You see, that's a.
So I think we'll take two more questions back to back, and then we will. I think we will be short on time. We are done with time, so we will wrap it up. So there's one hand here and one there. Is there? That's it. Yeah. Okay. So can we have the mic here and one there? The mics. Oh, he already has mic also.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My question, my name is Shaurya Sood. I am from JNU. I am doing my PhD from JNU. Sir, my question is to Mr. Shekhar Gupta. Sir, that you compared the in the last part of your talk, you said that one man can do a lot if he wants. Like the president, you quoted the example of former President Abdul Kalam. But sir, my question is that he had a constitutional shield that he could not be impeached so easily or removed so easily, whereas the governor is always vulnerable to the political parties which is appointing him. So is it fair for you to compare the two in that sense? And the second question is, why not increase the sanctity of the office of governor by making the simultaneous elections? Like say we are talking about simultaneous elections in case of Lok Sabha and state elections. Why not have it for the presidents and governors also?
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll take the second question as well, and then we'll answer both the questions. We'll get to the answers at the same time. Yes, please.
Yeah. I work with the Center for Social and Economic Progress. My question is to all the panelists. So, as an ordinary citizen and as a child, when I would read my political science books when I was in school and read about the powers of the governor, I used to be fascinated and also feel that it's an important office, it's a fascinating office, like we've just discussed in the entire discussion. But I used to also feel that it is not powerful enough. And hence, I think, come the vagaries of the examples that were mentioned, like one of the governors kept tweeting because he didn't have much to do, and that some governors have been misusing their powers. So, uh, in between the two ends of the spectrum of either abolishing the office or constraining the powers, can we do something to strengthen the office which might deal with the problems that we've just discussed? Just the panelists' thoughts on this.
So the first question.
Well, the first question is the answer is very simple. Every president of the republic has had the same constitutional shield. Why do we quote only Kalam or Narayanan or maybe one or other? We don't quote any of the others. All of the others have faced similar situations. No. So I'm saying that so that in a constitutional position, everybody has the same constitutional shield. But if an individual needs special moral strength to make use of that shield. Second, governor, what does the governor have to lose? That governor can be removed. It's a job sinecure that you get after a certain age usually. So you should be willing to sacrifice that if you really believe in your constitution and any morality or anything. Third is your question of simultaneous elections. It's much too complicated. Who's going to accept having the term of their term in power curtailed? It's okay for BJP to demand it, but BJP today only rules 11 states directly, right? So why would all the others agree to have their term curtailed? Similarly, at any point of time, now you see these three key states will have their elections in November, December. The results will come in December. Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, right? If after that BJP decides and everybody agrees that there'll be simultaneous elections, will the BJP be willing to have fresh elections in the states if they win those elections where they just got power? So, this is a complexity that has arisen from the era of Article 356, misuse of Article 356, when governments were dismissed very quickly, right? And that's how the whole algorithm got upset. But one act by a good constitutional body or individual can make lasting difference. Think of the Bomai judgment. That Bomai judgment had stood the test of time. Bomai judgment destroyed the idea of the misuse of Article 356. You simply cannot misuse Article 356. You have to have a very good reason to use it, for which that article was designed. But one judgment of the Supreme Court has done it. Maybe tomorrow some judgment of the Supreme Court on the governor's powers also will do something like that. That was a blow that a great institution struck for Indian constitution and for propriety in Indian politics. And that's how this happens. You want to answer that?
Just to supplement on Shaurya's question on election of a governor. You see, we can't afford two power centers. An elected governor will have a sense of entitlement to, deviate from what the elected government is advising you. And we are a Westminster model. It's not the Potomac, but the Thames which fertilizes the Yamuna. Similarly, in the state, the aid and advice, the governor has to be a figurehead. He can't be a power center. He was intended to give sage counsel, warn, advise, and discharge his duties. So, election is a strict no-no. He was a representative of the center. plus, to ensure that, there are no secessionist tendencies. That was the whole idea why it was conceived, and we continued on Malvika's question. The whole idea is they should not be powerful. You can't make it more powerful. They have a particular designated role. They need to be sensitive to that role. It is a constitutional office intended for a particular purpose. The idea is you will follow conventions and be an umpire. You have been given the immunity so that your actions are not questions. But unfortunately, some have read it as impunity. So you can't make it any more powerful. Idea is how to regulate their action. Judicial intervention when there is misuse, or self. Today the only course open is for judiciary to lay down and expect that they will follow it. Otherwise, hustings, the center which nominates the governor, it will be a poor reflection, and it is expected that people will show their anger. You can't by express provisions make them any more powerful. Problem is to deal with the misuse now.
Professor Tillin, would you also like to give a little bit of a gloss on this this idea that the governor can be made more powerful, or if you want to put it in a slightly different light, what happens really if in this balance that we currently have between center and state, the center also grows more powerful? How is this? Is it playing out through politics already? Is it something that it might happen through the constitution even further? How do you see this balance working out if there is greater power to the center at this point?
Well, yes, my main response was going to be that unless and until the states have more of a say in the appointment of the governor, I can't see that there's much to be gained by making the office more powerful. But if the states do gain greater say or involvement and at least a discussion about who is appointed as governor, then one way of imagining a different role for the governor would also be to see them as having the potential to be more involved on a day-to-day basis in other elements of intergovernmental relations. We haven't really talked about the absence of other strong spaces for negotiation between the centre and the states. We know that the Interstate Council hasn't really lived up to the expectations that were had for it, and so on. So, in another parallel universe where the governors were appointed differently, they embraced more of a spirit of federalism, you could see their office as playing more of a role in smoothing over or enabling greater discussion and coordination between the centre and the states. But as it's currently designed, I can't see the strong argument for further empowering the office of governor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, folks, there you have it. Please, a huge round of applause for our panelists, Professor Louis Tillin, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, Mr. K.V. Viswanathan. Mayuri, there's a few tokens of appreciation that we'd like to hand over to you. Professor Tillin, yours will be on its way. It will run its course across the borders and it will reach there. But yeah, please. All right. I guess I can take this opportunity to just thank all of you for making it here tonight. And specifically, I'd also like to thank my co-authors. One of them has already headed out. Oh, you're here in the back. All right. My co-authors, Shankar and Kevin, once again. Thank you. Thank you to Keshav and Richa for really putting out this book and publicizing it and bringing all of you here. You wouldn't have heard about it if it wasn't for them. Thank you to Preeti and Ankit, our sign language interpreters. And thank you to my teammates, Ritvika, Mayuri, and all the others who have already been through Vidhi and have since left or are there in other teams. But you've all been a part of this journey and you've all made it possible for this to work out. I hope you guys will read the book, and I look forward to the fact that you will follow Navi Books and see what future editions or future volumes it is able to put out there. Once again, the mission is to bring the law closer to you. If you have been feeling that it's not something you're getting, it's not something you're understanding, it feels very far away, we are there to try and bring it to you. So thank you so much. Good night.